Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the overview of the Emergency Operations Planning Process webinar. My name is Cynthia Arredondo, and I have the privilege of serving as your host for this webinar. This afternoon, you're in for a great treat. We've got presenters Laura Stone and Tom Kelly, who are both school safety specialists at the Texas School Safety Center. Before we begin, we'd like to go over some basic ground rules. The first rule is the chat feature is located at the bottom right corner of your screen. Should you have any questions, please enter your question in the chat box. And if we're able to address your question right away, we will definitely do so. If not, we'll address it at some point during the webinar. Please know that we'll also have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, and we certainly encourage you to take this opportunity and take the time to get those questions in so that the presenters can answer those questions for you. Thank you for your time, and we hope that you enjoy this webinar. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Ms. Laura Stone. Thank you.
Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. This webinar has a couple of objectives and outcomes that we'd like to just kind of go through at the beginning here. First of all, we want you to understand the key planning principles utilized in creating a multi-hazard emergency operations plan. And also, we want you to be able to identify the components in the K-12 six-step planning process in developing a comprehensive school EOP. And that's a mouthful, but again, today we're going to go through an overview of that process. But before we begin those steps, I kind of want to introduce the underlying planning principles that are involved. And these are not the 6 planning steps, but these are, basically fundamental elements that should kind of permeate through all of the steps in the process for creating your EOP. They're just principles that should be there. And as we go through them, I know you'll recognize them and understand their importance right away. The first one, supported by leadership, it's huge. All of your planning efforts need to be supported by your leadership. This leadership support offers ongoing support from campus and district levels. You're obviously going to have all levels represented on your planning committee, and they can offer some really valuable insights at their levels. They can obviously provide time and the resources that are really scarce throughout the school year, whether you need individuals to participate, a place to meet, to help get coverage for your duties or others' duties and things to help you actually meet together. So lots of resources they can provide. Obviously, their involvement gives a lot of key guidance with alignment and perspective. These leaders, whether they're district or school leaders, or even school board members, they can certainly help with that alignment vertically and horizontally. You certainly want your plans to dovetail and fit from the top down and the bottom up. Horizontally, you want your plans to be as consistent as feasible across all campuses and facilities in your district. So again, that alignment is a little bit easier sometimes to see from a broader perspective lens of an administrator or leader. Also, the leadership support, it'll demonstrate commitment in their active role. They're not just paying lip service, they're actually a part of the committee, they're contributing, they're advising, they're participating in all of the activities that go with emergency planning. So that speaks volumes. And obviously, they help with the buy-in that you need from the staff and assembling that whole concept into your school culture. When staff members or students see a leader that's participating in a response action drill, or even speaking to the importance of make sure you ask questions if you don't understand when teachers are teaching the response actions. Those mean a lot. They go a long ways. So again, they can help you get that buy-in that you need to make your plan really successful. Another key planning principle is using the assessments that you put out there and collect data on to customize. When you use a variety of assessments, it's really going to make your plan comprehensive. It's going to be inclusive of a broad spectrum of different aspects, whether it's physical or climate. We'll be talking later on the presentation during the 6 planning steps about assessments, but in general, as a planning principle, these need to be very comprehensive. They're also ongoing. This is not something that you just do one time and you're done. Your assessments need to be done on an ongoing basis to make sure that you're incorporating all the new elements that may come in. The data that you gather from these assessments certainly form the basis for your individualized EOP. Excuse me. No two campuses are alike, and again, you're going to have a lot of similarities, but you're going to have a lot of differences, even with two campuses right down the street from each other. So very individualized. The assessments also address local response capability. What do you already have on your campus or in your district that you can access as resources? Maybe you have several or more than half of your staff are already CPR and first aid trained, certified. What skills do you already have? What capabilities do you already have that you can help out with your emergency response? That's really important. And then also it's going to show you the gaps, what you don't have in resources that you're going to need in order to really have an effective plan in place. Another principle is, of course, the all hazards approach. Now, Texas Education Code wording is multi-hazard. So I don't want to be confusing by using both terms, but FEMA tends to use the all hazards approach. So again, same as we're going to broad spectrum of possible threats and hazards. So you're not just taking on the ones that another district has, or certainly a lot of them overlap. Every district is going to have a fire hazard, but there are some that may be unique to your area that Region 1 wouldn't even consider. They are prioritized by likelihood of occurrence. So when you do all of your assessments and you begin to decide which threats and hazards are going to be addressed, you're definitely going to prioritize those. You're not going to necessarily include all of them. Also, they're going to be focused on safety needs before, during, and after an incident. So that's really important to consider all three. We tend to think of the during the incident, maybe after, but the before is critical. Also, a multi-hazard approach, uses that common language. We've spoken in a previous webinar about some of the presidential directives that require the use of the incident management system, incident command system. So we're going to be speaking a common language when we are creating these plans and implementing these plans. Another key principle is providing for the whole school community. Through every step in the planning process, the planning team needs to take an inclusive approach. You've got to make sure that you are thinking through and including your entire school community. We think of students and staff and visitors, but also family members. There may be a lot of people visiting your campus during an incident. There could be student and adults present with disabilities, persons with access and functional needs, individuals even with religious or cultural, racial, or ethnically diverse backgrounds. Some of those we don't tend to think about in depth or detail depending on your school population. But again, when we say the whole school community, you need to consider a broad spectrum. Make sure that you, as I said, you identify and you understand what your community unique needs are, what your population is. And I've mentioned already about the access and functional needs of everyone that you need to consider. Medical is another one that you may not know that a particular group of students even has a medical need, but it's important to include those medical plans and that information in your planning. Okay, and we also have considering all settings and time. Most of our school EOPs are designed to empower staff and students to respond quite effectively and efficiently to emergencies that occur during the instructional day. But we've got to go beyond that and think, what about beyond that day? We need to think about the 24-hour period before, during, and after school. On and off campus. We have groups on field trips, going to sports tournaments. We've got to think about consideration of all of these locations and times. And again, every day of the week. We all know there's tournament activities and things going on the weekends too. So again, just more content and text for you to consider with these principles. And the final principle I want to just review real quickly is the collaborative process. I know this is a frequently used word, but truly, developing a really good, comprehensive, effective EOP really does take a collaborative group of people. You can't plan in a vacuum and have a very extensive plan. So make sure that you are including a broad spectrum in your group that's planning. You're going to want to do the whole process with this collaborative group. You're going to create it. You're going to do your assessments. You're going to review everything you put together. Multiple people are going to review it. And you're going to revise it as a team. It's not a one person does one thing type activity. Schools are also needed to work with district and community partners. There are just tons of people that are available in the community to help you. Local emergency managers, law enforcement, SROs, which is school resource officers, safety officials, public and mental health partners. So please reach out and invite those people to be a part of your process. This collaboration, obviously, it pulls in multiple perspectives and it allows you a more comprehensive plan, as I've already said, just to be very unique and to make sure it meets the needs of your school. Okay, at this time, we're going to look at the cyclical planning process. And again, I want to say this webinar, the remainder of the content is about these 6 steps that are in this planning process. We're not going to go into great detail and depth on these steps, but what we want to do is just give you an overarching idea of how the process works, and that way you feel like you're informed and you can dive in and maybe even identify where you are in your district in your planning process. So I'll go ahead and start with the first one, which is forming a collaborative team. Your team, you want them to be small enough to allow collaboration with those first responders and community partners, but you've got to have enough representation to have the needs of the whole school community met. This team is going to work through the whole process together. And again, as I said, make sure that you have the right individuals there, or at least invited. It may not be that all of them need to be at every single meeting, but it's really important to invite and have these people give their input. Several examples might include emergency management coordinators, superintendent or deputy superintendent, someone from the finance department, technology department. Definitely need someone from your facilities, maintenance, and support services. Food services is going to be a critical piece there. Transportation department, and a person representing athletics. School-based law enforcement, one or many of the school board trustees, and also certainly campus representatives from each level of your district. The collaborative partners from the community might be local emergency management, first responders like law enforcement, fire, or EMS. You could invite local, state, and federal officials, depending on your location and abilities there. Parent organizations. That's another that we sometimes forget to include, but they're really great input, and they'll tell you exactly what you want to hear sometimes and not want to hear. So they're really good input from a very good lens. Local health authorities, community mental health organizations, and building inspectors, public works individuals. So just a broad spectrum is going to provide a really good measure of input for your committee to make decisions and talk through. As you're forming this committee, you want to make sure that you are operating on a common framework. You're creating an approach that you're going to work together on. This shared approach requires the use of a common command structure, and we've talked about that a week or so ago with the legal requirements seminar. We talked about the mandate for NIMS and the use of ICS, the Incident Command System. And throughout the process of creating your plan and revising it, the members need to take time to learn one another's vocabulary. You'll have people that been there, done that. They, first responders, they function within ICS all the time. They're extremely familiar with that. So you're going to have to kind of make sure that you give each other time to learn and become aware of the vocabulary and the structure that you're going to work in. Then you're going to define the roles and assign roles and responsibilities. Everybody that's involved needs to know what their role or responsibility is. Everybody's got a strength or a certain aptitude that you want to tap into, obviously. Group dynamics being what they are, it doesn't mean that everybody needs to be at the table of every meeting either. If you assign these roles and responsibilities, there may be a small group that goes out and does the assessments that are agreed upon, and they come back and report at next month's meeting. There might be another group that's going to actually plan the training elements and go through the district and provide the training for staff. there's just a good role for everyone that's there, but make sure everybody knows what their role is, and everyone's involved in the process. And then finally, the hardest one probably, determine a regular schedule of meetings. We all know that time is just precious and rare. And so it's really important to just upfront, whenever you have your first meeting, whether it's at maybe the end of a school year, even in the summertime, you're loading up the school schedule for next year. So whenever it's a good time and you don't already have other events on that calendar, get these meetings scheduled. Make that a priority. Giving the community partners way advance notice helps them to accommodate and be able to be present at your meeting. So I know all that's very commonsensical, but at the same time, have those planned out so that you're not spending time doing that later. You definitely want to make sure that you have a mix of people around the table, and they're going to have diverse schedules. So anyway, okay, and Tom's going to talk about step 2.
Thank you, Laura. When we're going to talk in this section about understanding the situation, I think that everyone's pretty much aware at this point that we really want to increase our situational awareness on a daily basis, and especially when we're developing that emergency operations plan. You want to identify those hazards and threats. The San Marcos River that runs through San Marcos is beautiful, tranquil. It's a nice place that we all use for recreation and other areas. And generally, that river can be considered a hazard, but it is not hurt anybody. It's in a harmless state. It's someplace we want to go to. Now, that can change quickly in the event of a thunderstorm and flooding. It would move from that harmless state to a harmful state, and that moves it from a hazard to a threat. So there are hazards around us every day, and while we need to be aware of those hazards and identify them, we're more concerned with being able to respond and take the right actions in the event that it changes into a threat. So those hazards and threats are divided up into 3 categories. And the first one is natural hazards. And examples of those, again, are floods or tornadoes, lightning, all those kinds of things are natural hazards. You have very little ways of preventing those things, but you might mitigate some of those effects of the negative effects of those hazards by including those in your emergency operations plan and designing your steps for them. The next category is technological hazards, and those are usually failures of equipment or systems or processes, like a train derailment or a power failure or the failure of a dam. Those kind of things are technological hazards. And the last one that's broken down into is the human-caused hazards or threats in more of an adversarial relationship. Those would be your school violence incidents, maybe explosives, chemical or biological attack. And of course, you can have combinations of these things. It could be a human-caused event that uses technology as the tool for the threat. So it's very important to understand and identify those hazards so that you can put those into your emergency operations plan. We're not here to solve today each of the individual responses that we need to have for them. However, your emergency operation plan should contemplate all those. That's where the multi-hazard or all-hazard plan that Laura was talking about comes into play. So when we're assessing the risk, you're going to use lots of different types of assessments. You might use some behavioral assessments. You might be assessing a chemistry lab, or in this case, in this picture here, you're doing a site assessment, which includes a playground inspection. And you don't really know what kinds of things you have to include in your emergency operations plan until you really see all the possibilities that could happen. Even just a regular maintenance program is where you could make a start at. With playgrounds, they can often be considered a hazard, although it's a place of learning and a lot of joy for students. We also want to make sure that those hazards are mitigated and they're limited. We expect that kids could get hurt on a playground, but we don't want them to be severely injured or even worse. So, but the site assessments will allow that. And you may be looking at things like playgrounds and chemical labs, special events facilities, as well as access to all your facilities and just every portion of your operations. We've got to keep in mind also that would include other facilities besides just your schools. And as you're assessing the risks, you have to be aware of the impact to the culture and climate of the school as well. We know that the climate in the school has a great deal to do with the quality of the educational environment. So we want to monitor and look for behaviors that are threatening or any kind of that affect learning, bullying behaviors, any kind of people or individuals or actions that are threatening to others. And it's not always just the people. It could be the environment itself. A very uncleanly, building or buildings that are falling apart. They also have a great deal of impact on the climate and the educational environment as well. And then, of course, we have to assess the risks. And schools constantly get a number of threats. Some are very minor, some are daily, some are more serious. And we've probably not very many schools out there at this point in time that haven't had some kind of a threat against them, whether it's a bomb threat or something, whether it comes around testing time or, copycat type things across the country. We've seen a big uptick in those kind of threats all across the nation. So, we have to analyze those as it pertains to your campuses and your district, the kinds of things that are going on in your community, and make sure that your emergency operation plan addresses those and all your responders are on the same page. So you want to make sure that you've created processes to identify any individuals who are in need of some intervention. If it's a behavioral threat, provide assistance to them, a way to monitor, and it's extremely important that you have processes for reporting, anonymous reporting, making sure that people that see something can say something and then something is done about it. One of the things that is very disturbing, I believe, to all of us is after a violent event has happened at a school, you start talking about why somebody did that, or and then you find that everybody points to this person or these people as being folks that you would have predicted that those would be the folks if anything like that ever happened, or you start seeing some telltale signs. So we need to be aware of those, look at those, and make sure you have people and systems put in place in your emergency operations plan to allow folks to address those and get them looked at. And then after we've assessed the risk, we have to also understand what our capacity is for that. And capacity can come in many different ways. A lot of times we think of capacity in terms of how many people we have, and that's true. Not only the people, but what kind of training they've had. In a medical emergency, if you had something as unfortunate as maybe a lightning strike at a football game, having a few people that know CPR may not be enough. You may need 100 people that know CPR. If something could happen like lightning actually striking a group of people. So thinking about what kinds of resources you have, both equipment-wise and human resource-wise, and training. And also keeping an inventory of your different resources. If you don't put some of those requirements for your district into your emergency operations plan and provide for someone to monitor those, that may not happen. But it would be really good for a school district to have a list of equipment for responding to different types of emergencies, or even cleanup from a disaster. Hurricane Harvey tested a great deal of districts throughout the state in terms of things you never expected to happen before. But now you need to know whether or not, do I have a dump truck? Do I have front end loaders? Do I have method for reaching people in other parts of the building, real high clearance vehicles, things like that. So if you have that kind of equipment and can create that resource list and actually follow some of FEMA's guidelines for typing so that you end up knowing what kinds of equipment you need to request and who has it, who also has that equipment, your city, your county, or even private resources. So be thinking about having provisions for what you have, what you might need, and where you can get those additional resources. Now, one of the ways, while we're talking about assessments, how you would find some of those tools, and we're going to use the School Safety and Security Audit Toolkit as an example. If you go to our website, the main pages, you should see a header like this across the top of topics, events, tools, videos, publications, and then a little search magnifier, which you can do some keyword searches to find some of the things you're looking for. In this example, we've highlighted tools. So if you highlight tools and click on it, you'll see a drop down of a whole bunch of different toolkits. Now this one is focused in on just one of the toolkits. But all along the left side will be a photo and a list of, or a graphic and a list of different toolkits. So in this instance, we were looking for K through 12 Safety and Security Audit Toolkit as providing guidance for the assessments that you need to be able to check on a variety of processes and equipment and conditions in our schools. And there's a section in there that you can read that will add context to it, or you could move on down to a table of contents, and all of these are active links. So if you wanted to pick a specific link out and click on it, you can do that. It'll take you to that section, or you can continue hitting the next button. Just it'll keep feeding you content and walking you through the whole process. Or you can also go down to what's highlighted right there, browse and download all job aids offered in this toolkit. Clicking on that will take you to a list of all the job aids. And in this case, if you were looking for some interview questions for a nurse, you'd look at the third one down there, K through 12 audit nurse interview. If you were looking for the actual safety and security audit checklist, it would be second from the bottom. Or some information on how you might conduct a K through 12 intruder assessment. That is at the very bottom. So you can jump to that to be able to just go to specific job aids for that category as well. Now moving on, still within the understanding the situation section is you want to be able to compare and prioritize your hazards. You got to start here beginning to understand the context of what it is that goes on, what could happen, what effect it could have on your campus. So, how likely is it? What's the probability of a fire starting? Well, probably not real high, because schools have taken every step possible to be able to defend against fires. A lot of fireproof materials, everything is designed for that. So probability is not real high, but we all know it's possible and could occur in some areas more than others. And of course, if you're talking about wildfire, that may be a little bit different even than fire within your facility. But if you did have a fire, the magnitude could be pretty great. Catastrophic would be if you'd lose your whole building or facility. Critical would be, quite an effect on it. Limited might be to a classroom, or remember, you're going to have a lot of collateral damage of fire and water, even just from a small fire. And negligible might be if it was limited to a trash can fire or something like that, and it was put out. You might move on to warning. What kinds of warning time frame would you need? What kind of advanced warning is needed? And it's minimal usually because we respond very rapidly to a fire, as opposed to now if it was a wildfire conditions, you might need some more warning to be able to prepare for potential evacuations if you were in a real fire zone or potential area. And then the duration, how long an event like that might last. So you take all these things into consideration, and then you look at the risk priority. Now, obviously, this gets a little bit confusing because, a fire would be a very high priority issue, but because of your other factors of being lower, there's probably not, you may not worry about it quite as much as something else, like if you're in a real tornado-prone area and you're in tornado season, that may be a different story. So these are just some examples of how you might begin to compare and prioritize your hazards. Now, following with the idea of comparing and prioritizing, you're IDing your threats and hazards, you're understanding the impact, and you're assigning your priority. Next week, we're also going to talk about a THIRA, which is the Threat and Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment. We'll get into more details on how that might play a role. We're trying to get away from only identifying the hazards and then not really doing much with it. We want to take that information obtained from your assessment regarding your hazards and try to mitigate some of those risks so that it can drive down the priority of it, so that you can handle those a little bit better. So you'll get more context as we go along throughout that, but we just wanted you to be aware that assessment phase of it is what drives the identification of your hazards, which is what is going to help feed your emergency operation plan needs. I'm going to pass this on over to Laura now for step 3.
Okay, step 3 is determining your goals and objectives. So you have your hazards prioritized, and for each of those, you're going to be selecting for your EOP, you're going to consider the before, during, and after approach when you develop those goals and objectives. So as you can see on the slide right now, this is an example of, we've selected just the hazard of fire. And so you're considering a goal before it happens, during the incident, and then after. Before this is just an example, you can prevent a fire from occurring on school grounds. That is your goal. And again, the goal is that broad general statement that indicates your desired outcome, what you want in response to that threat. Okay, we want to prevent it from even happening. Your objectives that you're going to establish for that goal are specific and very measurable actions to take in order to achieve that goal. So as you can see, I won't read all of them to you, but again, they've established, and it's recommended. There's no magic number for how many you need to establish, but you need to think about your before, during, and after, and make sure that you really are thinking through what are some of the things that we need to do to make sure that we can achieve that goal. And being very specific, as I said before, identifying very measurable, specific objectives is important. That way you can know when you have achieved them. Okay, once you've done that, and again, you're doing this for each of your prioritized hazards, you're going to notice the repetition of, certain, we'll call them cross-cutting functions that continue to pop up and apply across a broad spectrum of emergencies. In the slide in front of you, the during goal, the 3 objectives mentioned, evacuating, accountability, making sure that you can account for everyone, and addressing medical and health issues. These 3 objectives could be the exact same for a variety of hazards. So that's what's meant by you're going to start to notice those common functions for multiple goals and hazards. And these are the functions that are going to end up in your functional annex section of your basic plan, of your EOP plan. We're going to have a completely separate webinar that will be presented on your threat and hazard specific annexes and your functional annexes. That's coming up in a few weeks. But I just want to say, again, we're just giving you the overview of the process. And in that specific webinar, it will go into a great deal more detail of what these look like when you pull them into your functional annexes. And again, you're going to want to make sure that you're identifying those key functions in all of your hazards. Okay.
All right, now we're going to look at step 4, which is a very large portion of your emergency operations planning, your plan development, where you're identifying your courses of actions. And the course of action that you have is going to vary greatly upon the hazards. Let me say, going into it, is oftentimes there will be limited responses that actually serve a great number of hazards. In other words, you might evacuate for a number of reasons. You could evacuate eventually from a hazardous material spill. You can evacuate because of a fire. You could evacuate because of a leak in the building or unsafe conditions, or a number of things. So while the evacuation may be a similar response, there may be some nuances to it based on which scenario or what you're having to evacuate for. But this is where you're going to start making sure that you have everything covered that you can think of. So you're going to take all those hazards that you develop and you're going to put them into this plan development. Now here we've got a few pictures, a little bit of a scenario of a tanker truck rollover. Now there's a number of things that could happen from this. Obviously, you could have a hazardous material spill. You could have whatever chemical was in that trailer leaking out. It could be airborne issue. It could be runoff on the ground. Or if it didn't leak at all, or maybe it was a gravel truck, but you still might have, diesel spill or potential for fire, things like that. So you want to make sure that you have actions developed for any scenario that you can think of. This one says shelter in place, and that would be appropriate for a hazardous chemical spill until you found out whether or not it was safe, and then you might evacuate the building. You may not have to, depending on what your responders, what information they provide you. So look at each of your, develop those scenarios, look at all of your actions, and don't forget that no matter what action you have, follow it on through to, like Laura said, do the before for being able to hopefully prevent or to mitigate, your responses during, and then think about what's going to happen afterwards. And always keep in mind your 4 phases of emergency management too. And don't forget about recovery. But your reunification may be an issue. If you have to remove anybody from a site, you have a site evacuation, you're going to have to reunify those students. Reunification is a process that can get very confusing if you don't have those plans already figured out. So make sure that your emergency operations plan addresses each of those 4 phases of emergency management and addresses the reunification part as well. Okay, again, identifying the course of actions. You have all sorts of things. During, you have to protect the students, but your announcements, the whole way you communicate with people, communicating with the parents, huge thing. We're seeing much more attention paid to that with parents in the community requiring notifications. So, making your announcements on the PA system, making sure that included in your operations that you have a public information officer, someone there that can relay information to the public. Provide medical support immediately and also later in the incident, depending on what your needs are. In this particular scenario that was given in the previous slide, you may have some immediate medical attention, but you also have to seal rooms almost simultaneously with that medical treatment to make sure that the bad air stays outside. You stop it from getting into the rooms, which is what you do the shelter in place for, sealing your windows, shutting your HVAC down, remaining inside your building, and eventually, hopefully, it'll lead to a situation where you can evacuate. So, these are some examples of some different objectives just following that kind of a scenario. So those are things that are appropriate to be put into your emergency operations plan for every hazard. So you just follow the kind of arrows down and make sure that you've got all those things covered. Okay. Now also some of the key questions. There's a number of questions that come up. So when you're identifying those courses of action, you're going to have a whole list of items that may come up that you need to address. These are very flexible. So you as a planning team would get together and decide what all those things are. What is the action that's appropriate for to respond to that scenario, that incident? Who's responsible for which actions? It's oftentimes not one action. It's a number of simultaneous actions. Keeping in mind incident command system and how that structure works, because that's the way your responders are going to be organized. When do you do things? How long might this action take place? There's usually operational periods. If something goes very long, you'll have new folks coming in to relieve people. What has to happen before other things happen? And remember, you start thinking immediately about recovery or reunification, even at the onset of an event, because if you wait until it's time to reunify, it's probably too late. You're going to have to get things rolling ahead of time. So you have to predict and make sure. That's when your emergency operations plan can really be helpful to you, is to make sure that you have people assigned to those roles, taking those actions. And by all means, what resources are needed, because it takes you a while to get some resources. And you can't just say, well, we need a special handicap accessible bus to come take some of our access and functional needs students or staff out of an area. Well, unless you have one at your fingertips, you may need to know where you can get such a resource. So be thinking about those things ahead of time. So you're going to have a whole host of key questions throughout that process. And so like before, one of the tools that we might use to identify some of those gaps in your processing for developing that plan is, again, going to our toolkit. In this case, we were suggesting going to look at the Texas Unified School Safety and Security Standards Toolkit, which lists the 4 phases of emergency management, the prevention mitigation section, the preparedness, response, and recovery. And you can, again, read the context about the standards. You can hop down, and each of the standards sections, the 4 phases are listed there. So you can understand the context of it. You can look at individual sections, or you can browse and download all the job aids, just like before. In this case, one of the most important things is to have a glossary there so that you can identify the terms and the context of the standards. And also looking at the standards themselves, and those standards include citations. So you can see if that part is mandated by state or federal law. and other resources that feed those standards as well. And then this would be pretty much what the documents actually look like when you're looking at the standards. They're organized by phases of emergency operations. So you can actually read the standard, understand the phase that it's in, and then there's your citations and best practice references as well. I'm going to turn this over to Laura for step 5.
Okay. Step 5 is plan preparation, review, and approval stage. So at this point, your planning team is taking all the work, you're gathering all of the data you've accumulated from your assessments and all the things that you have to put together, and you are putting it together, and you are preparing a draft of your EOP. There are lots of templates. Tom was mentioning the Texas School Safety website. There are templates on that site that you can go and look at to view them. But again, this is the point where you are definitely starting to put things together and get things written out. Just some tips, some commonsensical things, but again, some good things to remember as you're doing this. Be sure that you write clearly and you use plain language. Educators are like all other professions. We've got a lot of jargon. So just make sure that your writing and your content is very accessible by anyone who reads it. Again, having a lot of different parties around the table, a lot of different people looking and reading through your draft is going to help you eliminate some of those unnecessary things that you might use, acronyms and such. But write clearly, make sure that if there's anything you can do with a chart, a checklist, or a visual, it's certainly a nice way to condense and still provide the same amount of information. So anytime you can put some information into something like that, that would be a helpful thing to do in your EOP. Use, of course, logical, consistent structure. Again, the templates that we have on our website, they're just samples, things that you can use. Take a look at them, but they are very structured and organized. Then you want to make sure you provide enough detail in your plan to really be understandable, that anybody can pick up your plan and it's actionable. They can read a little bit of information and know exactly what to do. You want to make sure that you develop accessible tools and documents. You know the way that your staff, district or campus level, learn best. So if there's tools and documents that you can create to help them learn the content or access it quickly. I know some districts have the cheat sheet badge. We're all required to wear a badge. You could take off of our website in the SRP toolkit. There is a one-pager that you could reduce down to badge size, and does have the response actions, if you choose to use those, that a staff member could have on the back of their badge. So whatever tools that you feel like would help reinforce your district's response actions and your plan that you're creating would certainly be meaningful. So that's certainly a part of creating the plan. The plan itself, of course, I've mentioned, has 3 sections. A traditional format. You'll have the basic plan content. And the basic plan, basically, it provides an overview to the schools and the districts of their actions and their approach to emergency operations. Regardless of which threat, and it's just going to give an overview, kind of a background information. The other parts are the functional annexes, which, as we mentioned before, when you're developing goals and objectives, those cross-cutting actions that continue to pop up, those are going to be in your functional annexes. They'll be developed there. Then the third part is the threat and hazard specific annexes. And again, I want to pitch to you, we do have webinars coming up that are specifically going to go into a great deal of detail for what is in the basic plan, what contents are there, what does that mean, what is that, what goes in the functional annex, what would that look like, and then the same for the threat and hazard specific annexes. So I hope that you'll be able to join us for those. When we talk about the basic plan, again, I'm not going to read all of them to you, but there's a variety. You won't see 2 plans exactly the same, but the ones on the slide are very typical components that we tend to see. Again, just providing overview information, background information of how the school or the district is going to approach emergency operations. As I mentioned, that second part is the functional annexes. And again, here's where district explains how those common cross-cutting essential functions are going to be managed before, during, and after an emergency incident. The third part, again, threat and hazard specific annexes. Again, this is very specific. I mean, it depends on your district location and what your threats are and what their probability factors are. So this is just an example. They're common ones that may be in your plan. But we know that these identify our specific protocols that you're going to follow when addressing specific unique hazards in your district. Okay, so obviously, when you put all of your draft together, you're going to want lots of eyes to review that document. You've got a broad spectrum of stakeholders sitting around the table as a part of your planning community anyway, but you're going to want to get that in the hands of some reliable people and let them, a variety of them, look it over. Make sure that it's understandable, like we were talking about the tips for writing it. There may be revisions that you want to make here, multiple revisions possibly. Make sure that it's actionable. Make sure that if you say teachers are going to do this, make sure that's something that they can actually do in a moment of an incident. So again, having multiple eyes look that over and talk through it is really important when you're reviewing and drafting. Once you've done that, then you are ready to submit the plan for approval. And of course, the leadership is going to approve and sign off on it. Often this is a presentation at a school board meeting, and it's really critical to have that buy-in from all stakeholders there. So once it's approved, you are ready to share that out with the appropriate individuals who need their hands on this. It is really important for districts to maintain records of the people that are receiving copies of the plan. Make sure that you decide also which parts of this plan should be redacted. I mean, obviously there are portions that you don't want everyone in the public eye to know how you're going to respond. So a critical component of that before you share out is which parts will we share, and then which parts would maybe fall under more of a confidentiality and security plan or mandate. So again, who should get copies of this? Community partners, first responders, local emergency management. Everyone that's involved directly in the plan needs to know what the plan is, of course. And don't forget the organizations that are using your facilities. It's so easy to overlook the after-school care programs, the chess clubs, the karate clubs, whatever you've got as far as extracurricular. If they're using your facilities, it would be important to make sure that they're aware of your EOP and your response actions. So they're a good party to share that with as well.
Thanks, Laura. We're going to go ahead and talk about our step 6, which is the plan implementation and maintenance. And it can be done a number of different ways, but obviously once your EOP has been adopted and shared, it has to be implemented. The best EOP in the world is worthless if nobody knows what's in it. So, you have to plan for training, making sure that everyone has to know their role within the plan, and everyone has a role in school safety and security. They'll vary a little bit, and so will the training, but make sure all of that is covered and that everyone is trained on those procedures that are in your EOP. That is your standard operating procedures for your district, and your protections for that district lie in that you follow what has been approved by your board and the plan. There's always flexibility. We want to empower everybody to be able to take the actions necessary to save their lives and protect themselves. However, there are some general adopted best practices that your district will have identified and put into those plans to start with. So training and resources are huge. You want to teach those roles and responsibilities. You include your community partners. This is not the time to spring something new on them. Hopefully that they've been involved in your process as you went along, but let people know to the extent possible what procedures you have. Like Laura said, you have to be cautious about how much detail you put in there. If you're going to talk about having a plan that does allow for, evacuation, you're evacuating to a site near your school because of, say, a bomb threat, you don't need to tell them all the time where you're always going to go. You don't want somebody to be able to exploit that by setting a bomb in that facility, calling it a bomb threat, and have you bring your students to that location. So be cautious about how much you share in the way of details, but you should be able to reassure the public that you have met the mandates and that you have processes in place for all these things, whether it's holding a meeting, whether you're distributing materials. But it's important to visit all those key locations to make sure you've done that site assessment there, and you know what everything looks like. So training is huge. Now, drills and exercises, I think, is one of the most critical components of the implementation. Once you have instructed everybody, trained folks what to do, you have to test them, test their ability to operate as the procedures have been designed. You'll always pick up flaws. You always should be able to make improvements. So you're going to implement drills and exercises. Now, this gets a little complicated when you're looking into state statute here, because it talks often about your mandated drills. And just to, like we talked about in the legal issue, the law webinar that we did, Texas statute doesn't have a list of mandated drills. We have a lot of recommended drills, and of course everyone is required, every school district is required to do a fire drill once a month when school's in session 10 or more days. That's important to always do, and that is part of your local fire code and administered or monitored by your fire marshal. So that is a mandated drill. The rest of them depends on what your district feels are appropriate. Some may say, like, our minimum recommendations are to have a lockdown once every semester. You may have a district that wants to do 2 every semester, and that's fine. It depends on your needs and where you're located, as to which ones you want to do. Those specific requirements for your district should be put in your EOP, and they may vary from district to district. I know the media doesn't understand the differences between districts, and they try to lump everybody in that you have to do this or have to do that, but there is no actual statute where those are listed. Now, there were 5 drills listed in statute previously under the certification section of Texas Education Code 37.1081. First of all, that law expired and is no longer on the books. That went away September 1 of 2017. So that was part of a requirement if you wanted to apply for the certification. Certification was voluntary, but then you would have to have shown that you had done at least one of each of those types of drills during the year. Like I said, that is no longer in existence, but it never was mandated that those drills be done as part of your emergency operations plan. So that mandated list of drills is mandated by your plan, by the emergency operations plan. Also, I wanted to mention at this point that we've adopted and tried to promote the standard response protocol that was originally developed by the I Love You Guys Foundation. We have a Texas edition of it, again, on our tools, and go to the SRP toolkit, standard response protocol. And those of you who know John Michael Keyes and Ellen Keyes, they developed that after their daughter Emily was shot and killed in an attack at Platte Canyon High School in Colorado. And that uses no codes. It's very easy. It's a very simple program to be able to clearly and concisely operate, with standard responses. Now, we have the Texas edition of that on our website, like I said. Also, we will have the standard reunification method on our website in the future. Right now, you can also get that on the I Love You Guys Foundation. But it's a good program. It's free. It's got a lot of good materials there for showing you how to enhance your current reunification method, or creating one if you don't have a current one. But the standard reunification method is going to be there as well. Now, as far as drills and exercises, of course, drills are one of the things we do most often. And you may have lockdown drills and using the SRP lockout drills, sheltering for severe weather, or sheltering because of a hazardous material spill, things like that. But in addition to the drills, the law also talks about drills and exercises as mandated by your plan. So don't forget exercises. One of the more common, easy, low stress, no cost things is to do a tabletop exercise where different teams, different classrooms, different functions from around the district could address a specific incident and what kinds of response you'd have, and you do it in a controlled, very low stress environment of a classroom or a tabletop. And so that's a very popular way of doing it. You might just do something as simple as, okay, here we are you're working with your cafeteria staff, and all of a sudden there's a massive water leak in the kitchen. Okay, what do you do? And talk through how you would handle it. Likely, you may not be able to continue to cook meals during that time? Where would you go? What would you do? How would you get another source of food for the kids? Those kind of things can easily be discussed, and you can find weaknesses in your plan. You can find things that need to be added to your plan, through some kind of scenario like that. After tabletops, there's functional exercises, which really tap into a specific function as opposed to everything all at once. So you could talk about an active shooter drill or some other, maybe it's just an intruder, an unauthorized intruder into the school. You could see what your responses would be for that. So that would be a functional exercise. Full scale then goes the full gamut. That may be something you only do once every few years. You probably do it with all your community partners. You might have helicopters land. You may have EMS responding to your facility to give everybody a feel and to train your other responders as to how this is all going to work together in your transportation, your law enforcement, your fire department. And those are things that are encouraged. Oftentimes schools use some of their facilities for those, but it's a very long and intensive activity. So making sure that you conduct those drills and exercises are very, very important. We talked about the drills. One of the things I want to mention along with the drills, just because it came up with the Florida shooting, is if you were in lockdown and the fire alarm goes off. Hopefully most folks include in their training for that lockdown drill the understanding that you should ignore fire alarms, if there's a lockdown and a potential for a dangerous situation that you could be drawn out into. However, you're going to have to increase the intelligence and awareness of your surroundings to make sure that the fire isn't real. So watch out for an ever-changing environment there, because obviously you don't want everybody evacuating into the line of fire and somebody who's intent on drawing people out. But yet, if it got to the point where there actually was a fire there, you would have to, at some point in time, address that and deal with it. So looking for your other options immediately is important. So consider all those types of things as well. Also, Laura and I were looking earlier today too on the fire marshal's website. They used to always mention that you should do an obstructed fire drill during the year, and that is a very good idea. We think it's the best practice. I have failed to be able to find anything that mandates that you do obstructed fire drills, but in most cases you have to identify a primary and a secondary exit for your drills and for egress out of your classrooms. So out of the classrooms and out of the building. So if you do an obstructed fire drill, that's just simply a process of cutting off one of your escape routes and making the people follow their secondary protocol and their secondary exit strategy. So you may find that some of your folks didn't know they had a secondary one. That's one of the purposes. That's one of the purposes of doing a drill, is to make sure you find out before the real thing happens. So we would encourage you to look and incorporate possibly an obstructed drill, and talk to your local fire marshal about it, because they can usually help you. You might just put some tape over one of the doors, or stand there, or we actually have a stand-up cardboard cutout of flames that you can put in there to, as people come down the stairs, they just see they can't get out that way, and it says, "What now?" And hopefully they know immediately to go toward that secondary exit. So some things like that may help you as well. One question that came up that I think we can answer right now too is, once your emergency operations plan has been approved by the board, the question was, do you also need to get board approval for any updates? My answer to that would be no, but it's up to you as a district to decide. If you wish to actually, approve additional changes, that's not a bad thing to do, but your changes should be pretty often. So, you might at least annually look at any kind of changes and maybe apprise your board, communicate with your board. If it's a total revamp, maybe you had an EOP that really looked more like a flip chart than an EOP. Maybe you should adopt a more thorough plan once you have made significant changes to it. So, look at it that way, but every time something changes, because really you should change your EOP anytime people change positions. You've got some different facilities, all sorts of things could necessitate you updating your plan, and no, you do not have to go and get approval every time you make any kind of a change to your EOP. So hopefully that'll help to answer that. One other section to this whole thing is you have to maintain it. It's something that never really goes away. It's kind of like laundry. You deal with it, and it comes right back, and you're doing it again. The same way with your plan. It's always going to be there. You're always going to be improving it. Nobody can ever say that they've finished their EOP or that there's nothing to do on it. You should consistently update it. There are things and processes that we put into place now and best practices that are very, very different than what we talked about 10 or 15 years ago. So remember, those things evolve, and your plan needs to evolve too. So one of the important things to do, and your Safety and Security Committee can really help with this, you identify things that need to be changed, make sure they get put into the EOP, and those changes are communicated to everybody. Very, very important sections. But remember that EOP is always constantly being worked on and evolving. I'm going to hand this over to Cynthia real quick as we can get into question and answer side of it.
Okay, great information, Tom and Laura. Thank you all so much. At this time, we're going to certainly open the floor for any questions that you may have. I know Tom has addressed one of the questions that has come in. So if you can, jot down your questions if you have any, and please do take the opportunity to have your questions answered at this time. And while some of those questions come in, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the evaluation that we're going to ask you all to complete. At the conclusion of the webinar, we're going to send out an evaluation. And the only way that we're going to improve and enhance what we do here at the center, and including the webinars, is to get your feedback. Please let us know what we can do to ensure good quality information is being provided to you. Resources are being provided to you as well. And it's going to be a very quick and simple evaluation. And the good thing is that once you submit the evaluation, you'll get a link to the outline of the materials or any additional materials that Tom and Laura have prepared for you all. The evaluation will be sent out tomorrow at the latest. And so we encourage you to fill out the evaluation, submit it, and then once you hit submit, you'll get the link to the materials for this webinar.
Okay, while we're waiting on any additional questions, just want to do a little plug for next week's webinar. The topic is conducting a THIRA. And this is where we're going to dig into that step 2, understanding your situation, and really dig into an in-depth process. So hopefully you'll be able to join us next week if you've registered for the webinar content next week. And also we want to make sure you have our current contact information. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate. You see our emails there on the screen, our direct phone lines. These are also located on our Texas School Safety Center website. So please feel free to reach out anytime. There's not a stupid question. We're a community of learners. So please call us and ask, and we'll direct you into the right information, or we'll do some research for you or help you to get some answers. So thank you.
And we'll hang around for just a little bit to see if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, you can use this contact information to get a hold of us. But if anybody has a question you want to address to the group, you can please put those in right away. We won't be online too much longer. But I'll go ahead and mute this right now, and pending any other questions we might get, we may be able to come back on real quick, but we'll be signing off pretty soon. So get those in, and thank you for your time and for participating with us.